speaks. The beat of life that always goes on. Percussive spirit of sound. All over the world, in joy and pain, people move, people live, people love. A gente mexe, a gente vive, a gente ama.
Axé, babá.
To the beat. From Luanda to Palmares, Alagoas. From old Oyo, Yorubaland, to Africa Pequena, Rio de Janeiro. From Aladá da Romê até Liberdade, Cabuna, Peri-Peri, São Salvador da Bahia, de todo Santo Brasil. Não, not happens. Acontece muita coisa. There are meetings at the crossroads. Beauty is born. Journeys come full circle. We celebrate and protect life through the drums. I'm Dr. Umi Vaughan. Thanks for having me. Give yourself a round of applause. I want to make sure you guys know, and I want to give my thanks to Dr. Patricia Munsami. You guys must know how wonderful of a person and scholar she is. Thank you, Patty, for inviting me and thinking of me. A round of applause for Dr. While we're here and while we're talking about culture and while we're talking about African American History Month, Black History Month, I want to take a moment for shameless self-promotion. The work that I'm talking about today is sitting on the foundation of some previous work I did about drumming and its importance within the African diaspora. I did an earlier book about Afro-Cuban bata drumming and the next book about contemporary dance music as a voice of resistance of the people. Both of them are written in a kind of popular voice so that you can use it for a class. It's taking the Eiffel Tower of academia and taking it to the streets. I also want to take a second to big up my co-author and co-conspirator, Dr. Danielle Boaz. She's not here with us this afternoon, but she wrote a book called Banning Black Gods, which is about legal persecution of African-derived religions all over the Black world, from Jamaica to Miami to Brazil to Cuba, etc. And a next book that she did called Voodoo, the history of a racial slur, how the term Vodun, which means spirit, came to be bastardized and denigrated to the point of voodoo and the kind of weird movies that we see about it, etc. Dr. Boaz and I, during the pandemic time, we got a grant from Notre Dame University, and it took us throughout Brazil examining the question of religious intolerance against the Afro-Brazilian religion called candomblé. We spent time in Brasilia, the capital. We were in Rio de Janeiro. We were in a town called Maceió. We were in Salvador, one of the cradles of Black civilization in the New World. We were in the far north, São Luís de Maranhão. And this was the pandemic time, so we was half-chef suited up. We had saran around our whole bodies, just trying to stay safe, but also get this work done with the grant that we had. So these images here are just some examples of some of the temples that we entered and some of the communities that opened their arms and their kind of spiritual families to us to learn about how especially evangelical Christians were terrorizing their communities. Just to give you an idea. So what is candomblé? Candomblé is an umbrella term that encompasses different branches or nations of religious practice that have related but distinct histories and communities. The most widely recognized nations were heavily influenced by a few ethnic groups. On one hand, the Yoruba, from the southwestern corner of the modern-day nation of Nigeria, that gave rise to what's called the Candomblé Ketu or Candomblé Nago. The West Central African legacy from modern-day nations like Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, Gabon, gave rise to what is now known as Candomblé Angola, or Candomblé Congo Angola. The third main nation or group is from Bay or Fon Dahomey, modern day nations like Benin and Togo. That's known as Candomblé Jeje. Enslaved people from these regions of Africa maintained connections to languages, musical practices, and rituals that they had brought with them and that they adapted on Brazilian soil, incorporating also influences from the native peoples of Brazil. In some cases, African divinities and ideas were disguised under and influenced by Catholic ideology and symbols. So you have instances of a Yoruba Orisha such as Shango being paired in Brazil with San Jeronimo. Right, just as in Cuba, Shango is paired with another saint, Saint Barbara. Right, so this notion of hiding in plain sight, taking what you know that you need to hold on to, but in the face of colonial opposition, being ingenious about how to do so. One of my spiritual and scholarly godfathers, John Mason, he wrote a book that talks about some of the shared beliefs of these Yoruba, Congo, and Dahomey derived religions in the Americas. There's a list of 10 things that these practices share. People who are within these nations of Ketu, Nago, Angola, and Jeje believe there is one God who created and controls the universe and all that is contained therein. 2, there are selected forces of nature called Orisha, or called Inkisi, or called Vodun, that deal with the affairs of humankind on earth and govern the universe. 3, they believe a person's spirit lives on after death and can reincarnate back into the world. 4, they believe in ancestor spirits that have power over those who remain on earth, and so must be remembered, appeased, honored, and consulted by the living. 5, these communities believe in divination, so communicating with ancestors, spirits, divinities, and other entities using mediumship and or rituals employing tools such as seeds, nuts, etc., divination systems. 6, we believe in the use of offerings and animal sacrifice to elevate prayers to the divinities, to the spirits, and to the ancestors. This is an area that's sometimes misunderstood and attacked. It's really about being in line with nature, like praying over that food that you're going to eat, right? Rather than in the United States, we have not knowing where our food comes from, or raising animals in these inhuman, cruel farms and all this kind of thing, right? This is about being one with the cycle of life. 7, we believe in the ability of rituals, and unseen forces to impact the natural world. 8, we believe in the spiritual use of medicine and herbs. 9, we believe that ritual, song, and dance are mandatory in venerating the spirits. You have to have song and dance in order to make the connection with the other side. 10, and lastly, humans can commune with ancestors, Orisha, etc., through the vehicle of trance possession, so that the drums and song can open up a space that the spirit can enter our bodies, walk among people, heal, give advice, etc. Okay? The term candomblé can be traced back to 1826, which is the first time it's found reference in any Brazilian books. Scholars believe that the term is likely of Bantu Congo origin. Candomblé is a decentralized state, so that there's no pope or no high boss or authority. Rather, leaders emerge within their community and they establish what are called terreiros, which at once are communities of people they have initiated or people who look to them for healing and guidance and ritual. And terreiro also refers to a physical location, almost like a campus, right? Which has ceremonial spaces, that has living quarters, that has spaces for cooking, etc. the tejero. And around these tejeros, a very beautiful lifeway develops, led by oftentimes women, Iyalorisha. I mentioned in the title of this lecture, power. So we must know that these tejeros, this candomblé, emerged during the colonial era when Congo Africans, when Yoruba Africans, when Dahomey Africans were being brought to Brazil and to other parts of the Americas in order to work, right? Against all odds and against legal persecution, they were able to maintain drum rhythms, song liturgies, dances, etc., that maintained a connection to Africa and were a way of fomenting community well-being that don't feel good. So similar to ring shouts in the United States, similar to the bata drumming in Cuba, the candomblé drums were a way for people to create a home space in this satellite location of Brazil. So I'd like us to take a moment to meet the members of the drum family. These drums are known as atabaque. Can you say that? Atabaque. Atabaque. Good. Each instrument has its own name, its own function within the ensemble. We'll start off with the bell, which is sometimes called agogo. Can you say that? Agogo? Agogo. And can you hold up the bell, please, Rosa? This double-mouthed bell is called agogo. Sometimes it's shaped differently with, looks like a hoe or something like that. And when it's that way, it's called a gama. But this is an agogo. So play a pattern on agogo, please, Rosa, so we can have an idea. Yes, and so the agogo provides a clave, an anchor, an axle around which the other drum parts wrap themselves. The smallest drum is called lei. So lei will play a simple part that way. The next largest drum, called umpim, would play a complementary part usually. In the atabaque drum, sometimes the lei and the umpim double each other. Sometimes they complement each other. So. All families, there has to be somebody guiding, somebody giving the orders. In this case, it's the largest drum, which is called hum. Can you guys say that? Hum. One more time, feels good. Hum. Yes. All together, let's have that same pattern roll up and maybe just a little bit slower. Wow. So we have to see these drums as a source of power, a source of creating energy in order to survive in an adverse situation, right? A way to keep on keeping on, as we like to say among Black Americans. This drumming and this religious system is a cousin to Cuban Santeria, a cousin to Haitian Vodun, a cousin to Trinidadian Shango, right? I see it as a kind of cultural counterattack to an opposite-facing colonial power, which exerted itself trying to smash out the humanity of these Africans and keep only their work, keep only their production, right? So when we think of power, we have like two opposing forces. The drum trying to expand the humanity of the Africans and their descendants, trying to foment joy, and then on the other side, the colonial thing trying to smash all that out and just keep the work, the production, right? And so to this day, I would say that function and that kind of relationship persists, right? So Dr. Boaz and myself, in our research, we found Candomblé to be under attack in a few different ways. Some unrelated to music. Unrelated to music, we saw monuments to Afro-Brazilian religion being attacked with vandalism, graffiti, breaking in and stuff like that. We saw Afro-Brazilian religious communities experiencing a wave of actual violence to where like people's grandma was getting stoned on the way, hit with rocks on the way to the temple that morning. Or people getting kidnapped and threatened if they were to continue their practice, something bad would happen to them, right? But focused on music, we saw a rising wave of noise pollution cases and related complaints as a form of modern day discrimination and violence against the drumming, which is a essential part of the religion. As we interviewed people, they would respond always that if we can't drum, that's gonna throw the most serious monkey wrench in our spiritual practice, right? So our goal in conducting this research and putting together the book that's coming out, look for it soon. I'll try and get a note about it out to you guys through Dr. Sammy. The book is going to be called Silencing the Drum, Religious Racism and Afro-Brazilian Sacred Music. We wrote this book in order to draw attention to what we see as a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Although this rampant discrimination and violence against Afro-derived religions is well known by society and scholars in Brazil, it's not known enough and people aren't doing enough to stop it. And it's almost unrecognized totally outside of Brazil. So we're trying to shine a light on this religious discrimination and create a bridge to Brazilian scholarship and voices, and to highlight how these kind of noise pollution complaints can damage a really beautiful tradition, and that if we don't fight to save it, could be changed or even totally lost. Okay? In addition to the drum sounds themselves, the bell, the three different drum parts, singing is an important part of this tradition as well. So now I'd like to bring out a next rhythm, which is from the Congo-Angola nation. This rhythm is called Congo Chibolo, the Golden Congo.
Samba mele Congo, kabula nene, samba mele Congo, kabula nene,
important ceremony is taking place, there might be drumming happening to accompany the preparation of a herbal bath in the community. According to one of our informants, tudo tem uma melodia, tudo tem batuque. Everything has a melody, everything has a rhythm and a beat. Drums accompany songs and prayers. Sometimes drums alone praise the Orisha. Drums accompany ritual animal sacrifices as a way to honor the lives of the animals and make their passage more pleasant. Drums are used along with song and dance to make spirit manifest in the bodies of devotees in the Tehero during celebrations that are known as Shide. Can you say that? Shides. That means to work to make good. Shide, to work to make good. Each Tehero owns its own set of atabaki, their own set of drums, and drummers have a special charge, like a special position within the community as drummers. It's like you're the electrician. That's the work that you're trained. You've gone through an apprenticeship, and that's your office within our community. That's the work that you do. It's beautiful. There's also a tight connection between drumming, song, and as a third part of the thing, dancing. I mentioned that bringing the spirit from the other side into the here and now is part of what the drums do. And the spirits that come through are sometimes known as Orisha, sometimes known as Inkisi, sometimes known as Vodun, and other names as well. These are kind of like archetypes that represent different aspects of humanity, different virtues, different concepts within the philosophy of the culture. So one important Orisha is called Ogun. This Orisha is recognized from Nigeria, Yoruba land, throughout most or much of the African diaspora. Ogun is a warrior. Ogun is a hunter. Ogun is a tireless iron worker. Ogun is a technologist. Ogun is the patron saint of anybody who deals with metal. The taxi cab driver is a son of Ogun. The butcher is a son of Ogun. The barber is a son of Ogun. Ogun is referenced when people are battling to make their life better, to make a way for their family. I think of James Evans. Remember James Evans from what was it? Good Times. James Evans from Good Times. James Evans is on his way out to do something for his family, right? This black-skinned man, slightly sweaty, works a lot. That's an image of Ogun that's kind of, what we can kind of identify with, right? Ogun, right? So now, let's bring on another rhythm for Ogun, and now we're going to see the dance, which is a kind of poetry in motion. This is for a culture that didn't use written language, but rather wrote in terms of body shapes, wrote in terms of postures, in terms of timing, right? In order to understand concepts like valentia or bravery, right? So let's try a rhythm for Ogun.
Ogun ye patakori Ogun. Shalare Ogun onire oregede. Ogun onire akoro onire oregede. Shalare Ogun onire. Oh,
Yes, yes. So you'll notice that the rhythms that we were playing earlier for Congo Chiodo from the Angola nation are played with open hands. And that's like the ngoma that you'll see played in Democratic Republic of Congo today, or that you'll see played in the palos of the Dominican Republic also today, or like the conga drums of Cuban rumba, all with kind of Congo roots. The rhythm that we played just now comes from the Nago Ketu nation, and they use sticks called agidagi. Part of the beautiful kind of circle of life, circle of nature thing is we're using synthetic sticks today, but in a real situation, they go to the forest and find sticks that are just perfect and whittle them down. And so like each drummer has his own kind of hand-picked, sculpted sticks, and so they feel get more connected to the music that they're making. It's very beautiful. One of the beautiful things about this candomblé music is the way that it's kind of filtered out of these religious communities into the rest of Black Brazil and then into the rest of Brazil in general, which is tinged by Black culture always. 51% or so of Brazilians are Black or brown straight up, and then beyond that, so many Brazilians are influenced by Black culture, right? And so if the music of candomblé were to end or be thwarted in any way, a lot of the rest of the popular music that the world loves so much. We just got finished with carnival time, right? There wouldn't be no carnival without the candomblé that undergirds it, right? So we have to really be aware of this kind of danger. I want to read to you an excerpt from our book where a gentleman talks about an attack on his home around these drums. Can I read that for you?
Yes.
Okay. In September of 2018, a Tejero called Ile Ashe Omo Elde Egbe Logunede, a community in the town called Iturama in the state of Minas Gerais, was hosting an initiation ceremony. Neighbors of the Tejero called the authorities to complain about quote-unquote noise pollution due to the playing of atabaques. Several cars full of police officers arrived at the Tejero, seized the atabaques, and issued a citation to the religious leader named Padre Diego, Father Diego. The devotees were unable to complete the initiation ceremony, which had cost them upwards of $20,000 US in wasted food, ceremonial clothing, and fees for ritual officiants. The atabaques, which are not supposed to be touched by persons who are not initiated to the drums, were held in an evidence locker at the police station for 15 days before authorities finally returned them. Pai Diego was never compensated for the cost of the aborted ceremony, nor the emotional distress of the invasion. This is just one example of a common problem in Brazil. Prejudiced persons are characterizing Afro-Brazilian sacred music as a form of moral and/or environmental pollution and committing acts of physical and institutional violence in an effort to silence Afro-Brazilian religious communities. The soloists, who are called alabe, can you say that, alabe? They developed their own brand of virtuosity, each one with his own kind of special language. Departing from the standard rhythm, that everyone learns, but then with a little bit of his teacher's language, a little bit of another master drummer's language, a little inspiration from God himself. They come up with their own blend of funk, right? So we're gonna start with Marcos kind of demonstrating that virtuosity, right? After that, we'll bring the rest of the instruments in and we'll be treated to some dancing by Rosa for another Orisha. This time, Oshun, the spirit of the river, the spirit of commerce, the spirit of sensuality and childbirth. So here we go, Ijesha.
Onyenye choro do, choro ma, choro me, pepe, choro do. Onyenye choro do, choro ma, choro me, pepe, choro do. Olha eu. Onyenye choro do, choro ma, choro me, pepe, choro do. Onyenye choro do.
In our book, Silencing the Drum, we argue that the process of neighbors initiating noise complaints against Afro-Brazilian religious communities, police, and other authorities investigating and adjudicating those complaints, as well as vigilante violence against leaders and devotees, all serve as modern mechanisms of silencing what many still unfortunately view as primitive practices. We also contend that unless Afro-Brazilian sacred music is protected from a rising wave of attacks, such as the one against Pai Diego and his terreiro, the effects on these important practices could be, and perhaps already have been, devastating and permanent. Another example that we came across in our research, this was appalling and inspiring at the same time. In Rio de Janeiro, they have a phenomenon where drug traffickers who go to jail and while in jail get evangelized, right? And they get indoctrinated with the idea that the tough life that they've had, growing up in the hood, as it were, is in part because of their family's traditional ties to African religions. I guess that devil worship that makes you burn up. So when they come back out, they take that new evangelized stance and that kind of angst and use it to attack the religious practitioners of Candomblé in their community. So in one particular case, they show up at this woman's door. We hear that you've been playing, Atabaki for Shango and for Oshun and for Ogun. If you keep doing that, take care of me. And there's no joke, right? You can't go to the police and make no complaint about what happened. It's really real. Instead of folding, though, instead of capitulating to their demands, what did this lady do? She bought or borrowed the biggest set of speakers she could find, set those out in front of her house, and blasted evangelical music. Meanwhile, deep inside of her house, she continued to play Natabaki. Right? So we found all kinds of examples of, what amounts to terrorism and abuse, and then at the same time, ingenuity, kind of fierce attachment to these ancient practices, these family practices, right? And so I felt inspired and really proud of the people who talk to us and share their experiences with us. We're gonna, this is the second to last rhythm that we'll share with you. This one is for the Orisha called Shango. Can you guys say Shango? Shango is the Orisha of justice. So we think about Shango, we think of trying to have the right thing happen, being on the side of right? And so this rhythm is for Shango. It's called Aluja Shango. Kawo Kabiesi.
Kawo Kabiesi.
So try this out. Can you guys say Kawo?
Kawo.
Say Kabiesi.
Kabiesi.
Say Kawo Kabiesi. So if the rhythm gets good to you, you're authorized to say Kawo Kabiesi. Okay? That means hail the king.
Aira, firma baixo. Aima, firma baixo. Aira, firma baixo. Aira,
rhythm. Any questions?
The drums, the bottom drum, is that like a clave or is it holding the drums up?
This right here?
Yeah.
They call it a pagodo, right? Pagodo, and it's like a stand for the drum.
It's stand.
It's a stand. It's a stand. We see, in our research, we saw in one Tejero called Odunzo, which had problems with noise complaints. They contracted a sound engineer and they tried to make some adjustments to the pagodo and to some things around the ability to redirect sound, etc. So we found, you know, a variety of responses to noise complaints. Sometimes people would literally play softer, or sometimes the suggestion would be to just have one drum play. That's why I wanted to have you guys listen to Rocco's by himself sometimes, because that's one remedy that some people found, right? But yes, great question, thank you. There's a hand behind you.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of similarities with plena and bomba. What is the difference in terms of relationship with the dancer or the one who speaks and with the drummer?
Oh man, that's a wonderful question. The process of someone dancing in front of the drum, especially if they are overcome with the spirit, in Portuguese they say, from the drummer's perspective, dar to give to put drum, to drum them up, right? And from the perspective of the dancer, tomar like tomar soul, like to receive, to bathe in the drum, right? So there are phrases that the drum iterates and that are responded to or enacted by the dancer's feet or different gestures. And so there's a way that they can communicate with each other. The dancer can call certain rhythmic phrases from the drummer and vice versa, right? And in more playful rhythms, like one that we'll share with you guys later on, it can even take on a little bit of a competitive thing, like my feet are gonna out-drum your drum hands, or I'm gonna drum so much to trip you up. Right? So it shares that same kind of thing with, you know, the vocal, piquetes, right? A similar kind of energy, right? Beautiful question, thank you.
I don't have a question so much as a comment on what you're describing in terms of what's happening to the tradition in Brazil, happened in Puerto Rico, where we didn't get, there are regions of Puerto Rico that don't know about our drum. And during the 70s, because our drum was prohibited. And so I'm hearing like the same kind of, and we did not get our drum back to play. We played like the Cepelas played out in the mountains, but I would say from the 1700s to the late 1970s, our drums were not prohibited. All that salsa that we attribute to Puerto Rico, we had to play on Cuban drums because you could go to jail for having them drums. So it really is important what they're doing, calling this out, and of course, as we know, Christianity, as that escalates, I think these traditions continue to be in danger. In my town, the research that I did in my town, the drum was totally erased. We had them all on the ground. So the tradition of Boba was actually erased from existence.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So this idea of the precariousness or the fragility, you know, even though there's, you know, a lot of people playing or whatever, it's, you know, it's kind of dangerous, the idea of stopping even one generation, because when that's lost, it's hard to reestablish it. There's a book by Dana Epstein called, I can't think of the name of the book, but it's going to come to me in a second. You probably know the book. But she's documenting the southern United States. She's documenting English colonies like Barbados, etc. during the same era, 1600s, 1700s, and the evangelization of slave community. So she's having letters from, say, the local drummer renouncing the practice of being a drummer, saying like, you know, I'm not gonna drum anymore because Master don't want me to, or because it's the devil box or whatever. Similar things from fiddlers or from flute players, etc. And what she documents in that book is that by stunning one generation, it throws off the whole thing. And so she's showing how, like, you know, we have tap dancing, we have the funk in the United States, but we don't have African hand drums like Cuba or like Brazil because of the era that she talks about, right? So it's interesting. And another side of it that I think is really a trick that we're seeing in Brazil too is it's not always about stopping the drum, sometimes it's co-opting the drum. So now we see evangelical stuff, but like trying to use candomblé rhythms, trying to use themes and practices from the candomblé, like Jesus, Acarajé, Jesus, all that kind of stuff, like taking the African practices and trying to rebrand them in a way that still detracts from its original context, right? Kind of ridiculizes that original context. It's just deep stuff. Other questions?
But would that not be another form of syncretism, like taking that and using the rhythms for Christianity purposes?
Well, I think that if it's us and doing it to keep our thing is one thing, but I think if the slave master were to take it and do it himself, I wouldn't call it syncretism in the same way. I would call it banalization, maybe. Like maybe it's something banal, like, you know, this isn't about Shango anymore at all, right? Whereas the syncretism, it still is about Shango, but it's about something else wrapped around it, if that makes any sense, right?
Well, can you just, for people who may not know what syncretism is, can you just give a little description?
Syncretism is this idea of blending ideas, blending particularly religious ideas, usually with the aim of kind of hiding a persecuted practice behind a socially acceptable one. So in the case of Cuba, we have Orisha, Yemaya, synchronized with the Virgin of Regla, a black-faced version that is celebrated on the 8th of September, 7th of September. Or Shango, or the Ibeji, the Yoruba twins being synchronized with Damian and Cosby, these twin Catholic saints. Right? So this is the notion of being able to hold on to an African practice, but outwardly to present an acceptable Catholic. Right? Is what I encourage these things. Other questions?
I don't have a question, but I just want to make a comment. I'm very emotional right now, so I'm sorry about that. But I just really want to thank you guys for this lecture because I feel like I just learned about my own roots as an Afro-Brazilian. I just learned about my own culture like I never did living in Brazil for 43 years. My parents are two Christians conservative pastors. So this is something that I've always learned to turn my head away from. You know, you don't get involved, you don't get engaged. Thank goodness we never got engaged in any kind of violence, but it's just when you guys started playing, I started to get emotional because the sounds sound familiar, right? I'm walking by a certain neighborhood, you guys can hear it, and then I would hear the noise. So when I heard you guys playing, I felt emotional because, wow, this sounds like home. But when I saw Rosa dancing, oh man, that got me. Because that's something that I've never seen. Because I never had the opportunity to. Because I was really educated to turn my hands away from it. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll switch gears again. Oftentimes in the midst of ceremony, when there's people have reached the point of fatigue and there needs to be kind of a break to lighten the energy, or maybe sometimes when the sheet and the festivity is over with, we'll play a samba, a lighter rhythm still sometimes sang to the Orisha, or sometimes songs in Portuguese about other things.
Yeah.
So we're gonna sing a song over that kind of rhythm. Sometimes the rhythm is called capoeira, or sometimes it's when the samba de capoeira. Vamos nessa.
Bobo gira jamu congueira, orere. Bobo gira jamu congueira, orere. Bobo gira cujango jango, bobo gira jamu congueira, orere. Bobo gira jamu congueira, orere. Bobo gira cujango jango, bobo gira jamu congueira, orere.
Okay. And any more questions?
So earlier you were talking about, you said around 51% of Brazil are people of African descent, brown and black African. How many of those people are practitioners of candomblé?
It's a tricky question. It's one of those kind of things where people don't usually admit to it. And so, in a city like Salvador, which is considered the cradle of black culture in Brazil, we saw in our research that say 40% of people would say that they practice, but we kind of know that there's more, right? And in other places where black culture is less dominant or less celebrated by the state, you will have numbers more like 5% will declare that, you know what I mean? But it's one of those kind of things because of the stigma and because of the rising wave of violence, etc., people just kind of don't respond to that on the survey. Or it's what they'll just say that they're Catholic or evangelical.
Is the stigma, it sounds like you're alluding to the fact that the stigma is increasing. There's an upswing? And has it gone through waves of acceptance and?
It's interesting. Since the colonial era, the candomblé has been kind of despised or looked down upon. But during that time, it was the Catholic Church that saw candomblé as an opponent, as something to be fought down. Since the 80s and increasingly by half decade up to now, the evangelical churches like Igreja Universal have been gaining ground in Brazil, even over gaining more power and wealth than the Catholic Church. The outgoing president of Brazil was an evangelical person. So whereas the Catholic Church at least had ties to the candomblé in terms of the syncretism, right? There were some people who would be candomblé adept but still do things within the Catholic Church. The evangelical church, on the other hand, is like a total totally against, and has the kind of aggressive, kind of, think Trump, think, tiki torch folks, like, really in a uninformed way, kind of coming down on the practitioners of common play. And on one hand, it becomes a thing about resources, because if you think about marginalized communities where the common play where the tejeros are located, and where the tejeros would be that baseline of social action or of mutual aid, where you go, when you need a meal, or when you get hurt and you need someone to take care of you, you have no health care. It had been the tejero, but now with the universal church and the evangelical church is kind of tapping into governmental NGO type of sources, the church wants to be that baseline, that band-aid in order to get the wealth that comes from the state for that kind of aid. And also bringing in politics, trying to influence the government and all that kind of stuff. So you have all kind of weird circumstances, like you'll be in Rio de Janeiro and you'll be in one of the favela communities, and they'll be about to have a baile funky dance, where they're going to be talking about shake your booty and all that kind of stuff to the max, triple X. But play the all that music is coming from the tejeros. Like, even that rhythm that's so popular in the streets on, like, the big speakers and stuff like that, is coming out of the tejero. But before that dance will start, the pastor will play church music for a few hours and do like a prayer, evangelical prayer, before the traffickers put on this baile funky dance, right? So you have all these kind of mixtures of, marshaling the power of the ghetto, and is it going to be the traditional tejero that's allowed to continue being that center of power, or is it going to be wrested away by the evangelical church, which is growing?
Are there any current people in legislation or anyone involved in trying to preserve and stop the persecution of the traditional practices?
Yeah, a number of years ago, an important priestess in an area outside of Salvador called Itapuan was walking down the street, and she was accosted by some evangelical youth who kind of just got on their helmet about, you need to leave the Mauritius alone and all that kind of stuff. And they actually hit her with some Bibles. Right? And she was so kind of shook by it that later on she had a heart attack and she passed away. And it became such a big stir that they took the day of her passing, I think January 20th, and it became a day that they do a march for anti-religious intolerance. And so people in Salvador and around Brazil, they bring out their religious beads and dress in white and do all kind of manifestations against religious intolerance. And so there's a growing movement, and so the research that we did is kind of trying to be in that movement. The current president is a humanist. We see him speaking out about Gaza and stuff. We see him speaking out somewhat about religious intolerance in his own country, Brazil. His wife is a kind of lay practitioner who proudly talks about going to the church on one day and then going to the tejero later that night. And this notion of inclusivity, etc. So there are people out there. I would say that it's difficult. Like people say, like Brazil may never have a black president. You know what I mean? And by the same token, they may never have a president who's like a straight up congolesista as well, because of its history, etc. Right? But there's a movement, definitely. Those books that I put up earlier, Banning Black Gods, will teach you a lot about that, and then the one that we have coming out, Silencing the Drama as well. Thank you for your question. Other questions? Any other questions?
So, the anthropologist Sheila Walker, she had a documentary film Brazil. And the documentary was really looking at the African culture and the way that it survives in Brazil. And at the end of the documentary, she interviewed very light-skinned, what would probably be identified as white Brazilian youth that were embracing the African roots of Brazil and becoming practitioners of candomblé, etc. What have you noticed since you've been doing your research in Brazil? Are the youth is that where that energy is going to be that is preserving the African traditions of Brazil?
One thing that I see there is like a really real strong family vibe, you know what I mean? Because these Tejeros are, on one hand, literally blood families. There's a famous Tejero called Oshumare, and the current leader of that Tejero, his name is Baba Pese, and his mother was an important priestess in the house, and she was pregnant with him and gave birth to him like on the floor of the Tejero with actual Orisha, people mounted with Orisha as the midwives. And so people are actually grown up in the Tejero. So in most Tejeros that you go to, there's some young people who, strong, strapping young men or beautiful, nubile young women who have been there since they can remember, who grew up in the Tejero, can know all the songs, know all the rituals, etc. So they are bringing a lot of the energy in terms of political action, etc., and just holding tight to the women. Yes.
But in terms of race,
In terms of race, I see white people.
Seeing what Shane Walker was documenting in that film, or
You do see some lighter skinned Brazilians participating. Another thing that's happening in Brazil is the fusion of Cuban Ifa, Cuban like Babalawo Ifa stuff, and also Nigerian Babalawo Ifa stuff. What we saw is that a lot of the lighter skinned like people who identify as white Brazilians are oftentimes involved in those related aspects of African-derived religion. Like they might have gone to Nigeria and become Babalawo or Yamiba or something like that, and are in that kind of amicable sometimes or sometimes contested relationships with more established Brazilian Tejeros, like who knows war, and you know what I mean? So it can be that kind of thing like, hey white person, how you gonna tell me about kind of maybe like this? I'm a white person, I just came back from Nigeria though. Kind of a thing. Any other questions?
well, I'll have one more question.
Sure.
I didn't get to introduce you properly.
Okay.
And so I would just like to offer the opportunity for you to talk about your work as a multimedia artist and performer. So what you're seeing is one aspect of Umi, the scholar, but you're also an artist in your own right. You're also, an initiate of African spiritualities, and you're a dancer and all of that. So can you tell us a little bit about you and your journey to this project?
Sure, thank you. I grew up in Oakland, California, you guys, in an artistic activist household. My mom's name is Umi Vaughan. She founded a dance company called Dimensions Dance Theater. It's about 55 or so years old. In Dimensions. And so I grew up around the drum and, in this kind of legacy of the Black Panthers, close to home. Catherine Dunham, who's anthropologist, but also a choreographer and a kind of weaver together of things, African diaspora. So all of that is in my DNA. I went to school at Morehouse College, where I studied fine art, photography. I met Dr. Musami at the University of Michigan. We were doing cultural anthropology under Ruth Behar. And so weaving together, non-traditional scholarship. Like my whole thing is like, take it to the streets, I never forget, I got invited to Brazil by the Ministry of Culture, and I was standing like at a festival and people are talking and stuff like that. And I'm part of a panel, but nobody's, everybody's doing their own thing. So you have to really talk and get people's attention, and that was a beautiful moment to tell my story from Oakland about the Black world and win people's attention, you know what I mean, in Brazil. In addition to writing books about Black music and Black dance, I make photographs. I have some murals, some photographs on ceramic tile in Oakland. I just did an installation called Afro-Fatherism, Black Dads Here and Now, where we took portraits of Black fathers in Oakland and wrapped them around concrete slabs or put them on puzzles and broke them up and got people to put the family back together. The flagship piece of that show is a dinner table collage with portraits of Black dads and their families. The chairs are not chairs, but rather tree stumps cut down and painted gold to represent the family. And then at the head of the table, there's a Black chair, and there's a golden plate, a golden fork, and a golden knife. And the piece is called The Big Piece of Chicken. Like Chris Rock says, fathers don't get anything. Mother's Day is more important. Fathers only get socks and stuff like that, but you do get the big piece of chicken. So the piece talks about that. So I try and use various artistic means to have cultural counterattack. We are, in our society of capitalism, we're always ground down under work, and if you're a person of color, people see you as kind of worthless. I've been talking to my therapist lately about how it's hard to be in the street and know that I'm a friend of Dr. Munsami, or I came and talked to the people here at Napa Valley College. But when I'm walking down the streets of Oakland, sometimes people look at me, hide their stuff, or you know what I mean? And so that dissonance hurts me sometimes, And so I try to make artwork and presentations and write books that try and tend to that lacuna in my life and in our society. Thank you guys for having me. I want to introduce the musicians. We have Guillermo. What's your last name, Guillermo? Guillermo Hopi. Thank you very much. We have a beautiful dancer who also sang with us, Miss Rosa Machuca. And we have a musical director for the day, Mr. Marcos Rodriguez. We really appreciate the chance to share our work with you guys. Your questions were really edifying to us and going to help us do better work in the future. Thank you, and good night.